Everybody hear me okay? All right. We had to finagle the audio here, so hopefully everybody can hear me good?
No,
No? Okay.
you got to put.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to have to hug this thing.
Yeah.
Um, if it wasn't for John Kavanaugh here, this wouldn't be possible. So thank you, John. Okay. So welcome, everyone. My name is Andy Stecker. I'm the president of the Rye Historic Society. And on behalf of our Historic Society, we certainly welcome you here and wish all of you to have a wonderful, heartfelt, and thoroughly Rye evening. Okay. Now, before we begin, let me ask you a simple question: who here loves Rye? Okay, that's right. We love our beaches, our barns, our salty air, our stone walls, and yes, even our select board drama once in a while. Tonight, we're here for something very, very special. We're gathering as neighbors, as families, as newcomers. Yes, Rye does get a few newcomers these days. Long-term locals to celebrate a man who has done what very few people ever do. He's written a book, and he's written a book specifically about this town, Rye. From glaciers to grandmothers, from sandy beaches to streetcars, Alex Herlihy has brought 400 years of Rye's past to life in a book that's smart, poetic, moving, and full of characters you may recognize, some of whom may actually be here tonight. So tonight, I'll be sitting down with Alex, not as president of the Historic Society, but as a fellow Rye citizen, as a Rye lover, history geek, and a very lucky reader of this book, to ask him a few big questions. There might be a few more, like, what was the wildest thing you've ever learned while writing? Who is Rye's unsung biggest hero? And how many of supply phosphorescence does it take to change a whale oil lamp? So sit back, get cozy, and let's enjoy a night of memories, stories, laughter, because this is Rye, and there's one person who knows Rye best. Now, before we get started, I do have a few announcements. You can see over there the Christmas tree. We have a 4th annual holiday tree lighting coming up on December 6th. So hopefully you can join us on Parsons Field at 3 o'clock for fun, music, food, and a countdown to light this tree. And there's actually connection of that tree to Alex's family too. We'll talk about that later. Finally, a 20th century exhibit at the museum. We opened it this year. The museum is open for 3 or 4 more weeks until December 13th. So if you haven't seen Rye in the 20th century, please come and see us. The museum is right across the street here. And then finally, there is a sign over there that has coins. These coins were minted when Rye, in 1976, when Rye turned 250 years as a parish. Next year is going to be Rye 300 years as a parish, and the United States 250 years. So something big to celebrate. And we actually have a committee called Rye United. If you're interested in participating in some of that, talk to me. This is going to be a fun year next year. Now, this event will be about 35, 40, or 45 minutes. You know, Alex and I will be chatting about Rye, and then we'll have Q&A. We'll have a microphone. Lou Karabatzis will walk around, share the microphone. You can ask Alex questions. So in the back, we have tables. We have some Rye merch. We have your pre-sold books. So after the event, if you're ready to pick up your book, yes, we ask you to be patient. Form a line, pick up your book. The Rye board members are in the back. They will hand out your book, and then Alex will sit on the table there, sign it, personally dedicated to you. Probably not tonight the best time to have a personal chat with him, but you know he's always good for that. So, what's that? You can buy a book if you want more. So now, let's get started. Alex Herlihy. He was born near the end of World War II in 1945 and grew up in its shadow in Rye, surrounded by 244 other Rye residents who served. His mother, Jessie, was already steeped in Rye history through the work of Langdon Parsons and her own research and involvement in the town. From 1962 to 1976, he was mostly away at school and work, but always kept an eye on Rye through his mother's letters and visits home. In 1976, he started teaching history at Oyster River High School in Durham, where he was given free rein to implement new ideas in the classroom. That was the same year that he became a charter member of the Rye Historic Society, in which his mother had founded that year. It was also the year he moved into the old Marston house, which he had moved from Hampton to Rye in 1975. Alex lives over on Lang Road. Following in his mother's footsteps, he got involved in other Rye activities, including the Civic League and town government. In 2022, Alex was appointed the official Rye Town Historian, the first Rye Town Historian in history. He and his family are forever grateful to Jesse and Edward Herlihy for giving him and his family the gift of Rye. Without any further ado, Mr. Alex Herlihy.
Good job.
All right. So we got to turn the microphone on, Alex.
Well, I have the microphone here. Those
Oh,
buttons don't
yeah,
work.
but I don't think people can hear that. We have to talk in. We have to use the hand mic.
Ah, okay.
This is just for the recording.
All right.
So we are creating a. Oh, this is a lot better, isn't it? We're creating a little bit of oral history here, as you can see. Board member Dave Caswell. If you know a lot about Rye, Caswell, it's been a very famous name, a founding family here in Rye. So Dave is taping it. Alex, welcome. How do you feel?
This is wonderful. This is wonderful. I have to say, my mother is smiling down on all of us this evening. Absolutely.
So, writing a book, tell us a little bit about what made you do this. I mean, why did you write a book? Not too many people, I mean, all of us live lives and experience a lot of things, but you actually felt prompted to actually write a book. What triggered that?
I'm going to answer that question in just a second, but when you first get to speak at an event like this, you do have to give a few thanks. And first of all, to the Historical Society, great thanks for publishing this book. So a lot of people do self-publishing these days. That's good. This would have been a very different situation if I had done that. I couldn't have done this book without the Historical Society and the museum. So also, I would like to thank 4 people in particular. My mother was my inspiration. Bill Varrell was the unofficial town historian through his books and his work for many, many decades. He died in 2007. Bonnie Goodwin and I ran the Historical Society from 1990 until she died in 2006. And so that was a society. We actually had a museum in the town hall since 1986. So there was a predecessor to that building over there. And that was pretty successful. So we're very fortunate for that. Certainly, great thanks to my family. My wife Nina is here tonight. She's been steadfast in her support for me and the rest of my family and my friends. My friend Peter may be here tonight. He was a big prodder. When are you going to get this thing done? It was almost like a Cry Wolf book, I understand. And thanks to all of you for coming tonight. I mean, your interest in Rye, your caring about this community is shown by your presence here tonight. Andy mentioned all the exciting things, not just the book, but the exhibit, all the anniversaries. So very exciting time. The library even said to me today, listen, Alex, we'll do another one of these for people who couldn't make it. So maybe in the spring. So a lot of people couldn't be here tonight. And we also can do a PowerPoint with all the pictures and so forth. But now I want to answer the question. And as a kid roaming around here with such freedom, riding your bicycle down the middle of the road in the 1950s, and it was an event when a car came by. It was really exciting. And you begin to wonder, how did this harbor jetty get here? Who are these old characters sitting on their stoop talking away? Harry and Charlie Green. I mean, there's just so many reasons to be interested, especially when you can be out and about so safely at a time 70 years ago. So that really is what prompted it. And then my mother, with Parsons history, always on the table, always talking about it, reading vignettes to me. and then, of course, the birth of the society.
Well, yeah. Well, in your book, you say you can hear the voices of Rye people calling to us across the years. What do you mean by that?
So I'm a great believer that when people die, yes, the flesh is gone, but the spirit lives on. And that can show itself in many ways, right? In tangible things, in memories, in oral history. And that's certainly been true for me personally and people in my family that I've lost. But as I've gotten to know these people over the years, getting to know them through documents, through stories, through letters and diaries, you feel like you get to know them. You feel their spirit. They didn't really die, you know? And I think there's a lot of people here tonight who understand this very firmly. And we can work to keep that spirit alive for people. So that is kind of really where I'm coming from. And you know, the place where you really get this, if you saw the last Civic League video that Sam Weinbaum shot with Stephen and I, that has to be my favorite video because you know where it was shot? Right down in back of this church. And that has to be one of the most evocative places in this town. When you walk down through that old church graveyard, there are people buried there from the early 1800s, long before we had a central cemetery. And you go down that hill and that great expanse, all those people sleeping on the hill and down in the cemetery. Those spirits are still alive.
You give a lot of credit to your mom, Jessie. So, what part of her dream of Rye and living here lives on in this book?
Well, her dream was certainly realized in the creation of society, and I'm glad to see Ralph Meringue and Becky Martin here tonight, and myself. We're 3 charter members, and Lee DeRochemont is here. Those are the 4 charter members that I know of this society, and they're all here tonight, which is pretty cool. So that was realized, but then a museum, a building, our own place. But that's what was so nice in 1986, that the select board gave us the 2nd floor of the town hall, which is where all the public meetings were happening back in those days, rather than down in that miserable courtroom. And so we had a museum there, and so that was there until 2002 when we got the current museum. So she did get to realize some of it, and that museum, of course, has made this book possible.
Yeah, awesome. So it's interesting. We celebrated Rye 400 2 years ago. I know I just talked about Rye 300, but the book ironically has a little over 400 pages. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But how did you write? I know it took you. You mentioned it earlier. It took you a while, but did you methodically sit down and just write all the time, or did you have these bursts of inspiration where all of a sudden one weekend you wrote 50 or 100 pages, or how did that work? I mean, writing a book is really an effort, right?
It really is. And I just have to mention one thing. The real kernel for me, for beginning to write this, was a letter that I've carried around with me for decades, long before I even thought about writing a book. And that was a letter that Emma Foss wrote me in 1973 when I was doing a little informal research. And my mother, of course, said, "You got to write Emma. Maybe you could interview with a tape recorder." Now, remember this story, because this is really good. When you think you've been rejected, oftentimes you really haven't. So Emma writes back to me. She was born in 1882 and died in 1978. So 5 years before she died, she said, "Alex, I'm so sorry to disappoint you, but I think I would be too nervous sitting and talking to you with a tape recorder going. So I decided to write you a letter." That letter's in the book. It's 5 pages. It's Emma growing up in Rye in the 1890s, and it's precious.
Wow.
So, bursts of energy, the thing that really did it, and now it's time for the 2-story, 8-hole outhouse on Red Mill Lane. And this is the answer to the question. And Andy knows this because he now took over the trolley tour for me. Thank you, Andy, because it was getting a little old for me. But anyway, it started with 4th graders. Now, we innocently enough, you got to take a left on Red Mill Lane when you're doing a trolley tour. It's so beautiful, and you have to tell them where the beautiful old mill was that was torn down in the 1950s, a 1690s mill, and it was torn down for no good reason. Anyway, after you go across the little cedar swamp, when you go up by the beautiful Federalist House, and just after that, you come across a very old historic colonial house. And there's a funny little building, stands by itself. Oh, wait a minute, people can't live in that. So we had to tell the kids what it was. Well, we said this used to be joined to the house, but they tore down that section of it because it was newer. Well, what was it? Well, it was an 8-hole, 2-story outhouse. And some of them actually couldn't conceive of the fact that there were people on the second floor and people on the first floor. And I think they thought it was just coming. Yeah. So that, and we adults in the, I mean, we couldn't get it together for the rest of the trip. They were so funny about that outhouse. So that has been a highlight all the way along. But what I did for them is I created a 2-page timeline. Well, you don't know what you know until you start writing, right? That's the beauty of writing. And that 2-page timeline that I made for those kids quickly became 100 pages. And of course, I did one for the adults too, because the 4th graders, when they finished that tour, said, well, you've got to do one for everybody now. That's what started it. It was the 4th graders that said to do it. So we got to listen to our students more, right? And so I had an outline, that's a skeleton of a book, and then you start writing sentences and paragraphs, and it's really turgid and it's boring, but at least it's flesh on the bone. And then once you get an editor, like my friend Roland edited in 2018, my friend Weston did content, and then finally Tom Holbrook, who's here tonight, Grace Pierce, who scanned all the photos, she turned me over to Tom, and he got me across the finish line. He said, Alex, you got to cut this up. What I love about what Tom did is that he cut a lot of stuff that I just didn't miss because it's all the way through. He said, you got to get rid of the 21st century, pare it down some because we're too close to it and, we don't need all that. And he was right. But that's what a good editor does. So thank you, Tom.
Yeah. So is this book really more written for our neighbors, people in town, or do you consider this an academic treatise for scholars? I mean,
up until middle of last century, we thought only quote unquote university trained scholarly historians could write books of history. But of course, that isn't true because Langdon Parsons didn't fit in that category, did he? So people have been writing history forever. But we've had so much more great history written, and not just by scholars, but by people like me. I mean, yes, I know how to write a footnoted paper, but that was the last thing I wanted to do with this book, right? Because as Andy wrote in his publisher's introduction, it's narrative driven. The sources are embedded in the text. No, it doesn't have footnotes, but you know where I got that information because I'm telling you where I got it. And then it encourages you to go and read that book too. So it's written for both. In fact, I just got an email from Kirk Dorsey, who's the head of the history department at UNH, and he knows what kind of book it is. So it's for both.
Yeah. Was there ever a moment where you thought, well, this is just too crazy to be true? I mean, did this really happen? I mean, not everything that you write about is something that you personally experienced, so you're relying on, people's stories and, stuff that gets passed on through generations. But did you ever question anything? Did that really happen in Rye?
Well, I'm not going to give a detailed answer to this question because the first thing I thought of when he asked that question is I thought of stories I've heard out of Rye Harbor. And I just heard bits and pieces. And the little bit more that I know, I'm not going to pass on here. But that's just oral history, right? And everybody in this room has stories, things that they've heard. And what? I mean, we've had drive-by shootings here. We think we know who did it. But that happened in this century. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff that happened in all 20,000 of our communities in this country, right? This could be happening in any community. So yes, I've heard a lot of them, but that's left for oral history discussion.
Yeah. I always like when I took over the trolley tour. So we have 3 trolley tours, on Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day. And whenever we come into Rye Beach, there's, Love Lane. And as I learned from Alex, it was Lover's Lane, and there wasn't really a street, so it was something that people went to enjoy themselves, or
Well, that is, maybe some of you can help with this. I'm just looking at postcards. I'm looking at postcards at the museum. I'm sure many of you have seen it. The entrance to Lover's Lane used to have two beautiful elm trees, and many of you have seen that card. Well, I just read what the caption said. It said Lover's Lane. I said, what? Because I grew up knowing it as Love Lane. So at some point, did they have a Warren article and change the name? That's the kind of thing you would expect them to have done in Victorian times. It's like, got the cart before the horse here. So who knows? But I still like to think of it as Lover's Lane. And of course, it was like Banfield Road used to be when we were kids. There were no houses on it. So naturally, it's a good place to go. Yeah.
So I know that a 400-year history, has a lot of people that lived here. Do you have some favorite characters that you either know yourself, or have heard about that you incorporated in your book?
Well, I got to go back to the 1600s because I can't remember if it was Richard Genus, but it was a genus. And of course, this is just Sandy Beach, main towns, Hampton, Portsmouth, Dover, and Exeter. And then all the lands surrounding them that are now towns today were part of those towns. Richard Genus in the 1600s, and he's the one that built that mill that was torn down in the 50s. He squatted in the southern part of what is now Rye. And they were yelling and screaming at him in Hampton, and he would say, well, try to do something about it. Who's going to enforce the law back in those days? Or any time in the first 3 centuries. That's another whole discussion. Like, law? What law? What police? There weren't any. So people either worked out their problems themselves, non-violently or violently, or they went to court, and there were judges everywhere, circuit court writers. But Richard Genus squatted, built a mill. He was constantly baking bread and all kinds of other things. And he went to Boston one day. This is right out of Parsons' History, one of those anecdotes. And he was just walking innocently along, and a drunken sailor, decided to block his path and get unruly with him. And Richard Genus said, listen, I'm a peaceful man. I'm not going to do anything. Guy wouldn't get out of his way and started confronting him. Richard picked him up and threw him over the fence. And that inspired one of the poems in my mother's book. Now, those poems are not in my book because it's already a published book. I just put her first one in there. But her poems reflect events all through the first 3 centuries. And how was she inspired to write those poems? Parsons' History.
Well,
but I just got to mention my brother, and I got to mention the Goss sisters, and I got to mention the 3 women who founded the Civic League, Frances Holloway, Marjorie Miller, and Joan LaFrance. What amazing characters they were, and we're carrying on their work today, and what those Goss sisters did in voting to sell that farm to the town and not turn it into a development. So 3 cheers for them. Real characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the, sort of heroes? Obviously, the word hero can be interpreted, but I mean, we have War Memorial here outside, but those are people who, fought in the wars. But what are some of the people who stood out in Rye history that, we can really be truly proud of?
Actually, I was just talking to the select board about this because one of them asked a question about it, like, do we know the names of those people? And David Caswell came up with them for me. Who was in the Rye militia that marched off to Fort William and Mary in December of 1774 to raid that fort? That was the first overt act of the revolution. From what I understand, nobody died, but that doesn't mean it wasn't an overt act, right? And so we got those 4 names and 5 names, and we may find more. And so that, as Parsons said, those people were sticking their head into a noose because they're walking into the unknown, just like is being depicted in Ken Burns' great film this week. So much of the unknown. So we've had a lot of heroic action, but I just have to mention one thing. This stuck in my mind, and it just, Dr. Irving, Julius Irving, the doctor. He was a basketball player for Philadelphia back in the 80s. He just finished a great game, and some reporter comes up to him and he says, how does it feel to be a hero? And Irving just looked at him and he said, what? I ain't no hero. I'm just a bloody basketball player. You want heroes? You go off into the city and find those single women with those kids trying to make it. There's your heroes. And what that got me thinking of is all of the women in Rye's history, 400 years, their heroism, not just during the revolution to keep their families going when everybody had gone off to war, but all through the history. They are the unsung people, and it was only in the last 60, 70 years women had been written out of history so much, and now they've wonderfully been written back into history. But you're certainly right. Anything related to military, obviously.
Yeah. Did you ever learn something about Rye that made you like, wonder or change your view of the town? Or anything like that that stands out?
It took a while for this to dawn on me, but and I was involved in some of it, but one of the worst decades for the United States was the 1970s. I don't think I have to tell you why. Um, whether you were around at that time or you've read about it, it was a really rough decade in so many ways. But ironically, it was one of the greatest decades for Rye. And it was all due to grassroots efforts, whether it's fighting Onassis Oil Refinery, whether it's getting a recycling transfer station started, or, remodeling the town hall, or, Parsons Park Corporation. I mean, there was so many efforts, and it all came from the grassroots. And not to mention that amazing 3-day bicentennial party in 1976. That transformed my way that I thought about Rye and Rye people. And why did all those things happen? Most people had come of age in the late 50s and 60s. And so that's a tribute to the Great Awakening, the social and political awakening of that time period. And it just played itself out in Rye in that decade. Yeah.
How do you feel about Rye sort of changing, especially in recent decades, right? It used to be, as I also learned from Roger Philbrick and you, Town Elders was a town of farmers and fishermen, and really changed a lot, right? Especially in the last 3 or 4 decades, I would say. How do you, as a lifelong resident, how do you feel as you see your town, your hometown change?
Well, more things change, the more they remain the same. Now, with Proverbs, what does that mean? So, yes. All right, let's start with this statistic. When I was 5 years old, there were about 1,100 houses in town. Now there's over 3,000. So we've had 2,000 houses built since 1950. That's a bit of a change. And that means the land has been stressed because, especially now, and I think about the future, it's really stressed because you have to blast now in some places to even be a lot, and yet that pressure is on to build. So, but I think some of the good change is that, so I'm sort of answering one of your other questions too, but so there were challenges, but I think when you think how we've let our government evolve, especially starting in the mid 1900s, to create different boards and commissions beyond the select board, and to try to work together through our boards to try to find common ground and have a balance, between individual rights and the collective rights of us, the community. And that's a tension that every community goes through, and that's something that we need to work more. If we have more civic engagement, I think we can do a better job of that.
Hmm. Yeah. When you talked about the outhouse, obviously that's a fun one. What other things sort of when you think about Rye makes you smile?
Oh my God. All right. This story, I don't know if Gene Lowe is here, but we get to talk about the Lows right now. Jane Hallway and Gene Lowe. So when Parsons Park Corporation sold the field and forest to the town, that was all done by 1980. But all the T's haven't been crossed and all the dots haven't been. So the select board in 1984 took it upon themselves without any town vote or even the Historic District Commission, which I was on at that time. They just decided to put up big stone pillars and a huge big iron archway, and they were going to build a gazebo in the field. That's how the base of that stage got there, and that's how the underground service got there. It all happened in 1984, and that caused a huge uproar in this town because it was done without the town's consent. So Jane Holloway and Jane Lowe got it in their mind early one morning that they were going to do a little graffiti. So they brought their spray cans down to the heated arch. This was all documented in the Herald, of course. We have all these articles. And they began to spray paint. Well, of course, people were driving by, and somebody called the police. And I guess Jane saw a patrol car coming, and she said, "Jane, you got to get off that ladder. The cops are coming." So Jane starts to run. Well, Jane said, "I'm almost done." And the police get there. Well, they grab Jane. In the meantime, Jane is running in back of Dr. Joseph's house. And she's thinking, and one of the cops is chasing her. And she could hear him huffing and puffing. But Jane was younger and faster. And so she ran back of the parents' house, the back of the next house, and finally made it to the Chichesters, where breathlessly she called Mel and said, "You got to come and get me inside. We got to escape." And that was I keep thinking about that story and Gene telling that and getting the facts right on that. And the other one is Marion Barron. This happened at Rye Day just 2 years ago. We're sitting listening to that wonderful music on that stage, and I didn't know how this story played out. She said, "You know how Parsons Park really started?" So Esther Parsons innocently, put it up for sale, and obviously the developers came. So Esther comes with the developer and knocks on Marion's door. Marion lived where Dr. Joseph lives today, right beside the field. And Esther says, "Well, I want to sell it to the developer, but he needs to buy a 50-foot stretch of your land." And she looked at him, and she looked at her, and Marion said, "Over my dead body. You leave. Esther, you come in." And she said, "Listen, I know people in this town. They'll come together. We can buy your land." That was the birth of Parsons Park Corporation. And I didn't know that detail until Rye Day.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked earlier about that this book isn't just about dates and facts. It's a lot about emotions, feelings, impressions. Reflect on that just for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so emotional, and we're, of course, emotional beings. And, there's so much emotion just watching this great Ken Burns film, and it just makes me think, how did that play out in Rye? 161 people went off and served in the American Revolution from Rye. 39 of them did not come back. That's an incredible mortality rate for a tiny town. But even those that did, bedraggled, and somehow made it back to their regiment. I mean, how these people walked hundreds of miles when their enlistment was up and then went back and found them again. So much emotion tied up there. And a lot of that is self-evident, but I'm thinking of something very recent, just 5 years ago. It's an unpleasant subject, but the outcome was good. And that was the demolition of the parsonage apartments. But that's an example of the heightened emotion, and people were really upset, understandably, especially the way it played out. It deserves to be written, but really well-researched and thought out. We're still too close to it, I think. But and we've had events like that, of course, every town does, all through its history. How do we deal with controversial issues? So I try to imagine in the book, you're sitting around the table in the 1830s, and somebody in the church has just come from Dover and given a lecture on abolitionism. And some of the people in the congregation were outraged, and they got up and stormed out because they didn't like abolition of slavery. And other people thought it was great. So then they went home, and they're talking around the kitchen table. Well, all of them knew there's three things about controversial issues, especially about slavery. So as we look back, it's easy to sit here and condemn it, but we ourselves might have been a slave owner, or we might have just ignored it and turned the other way, or we might have been a Quaker or somebody else who dared at the risk of their life to oppose slavery. And we always have to remember those three categories when we think back and judge the past. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I saw, you quote a Russian proverb, the truth has seven sides. How does that apply to Rye?
So I think it's when you're looking back at any contentious issue and you're trying to understand um, where are the facts here, and there seems to oftentimes be a moving thing, and it's not just black and white, and it's gray, so it's multifaceted. It might even appear to have seven sides, that old proverb. And I've always liked that because it makes you remember that everything isn't black and white. It isn't simple, and you really have to work at it. You have to keep talking with people and learning and listening to their point of view.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, history, as you say, is a blend of truth, myth, and memory, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you know that in your book you kind of found the right balance? What was your approach to that?
Well, I never use the word myth in a negative way. I do use the word mythology in my preface, and I invite you to see what I say about that. It's unfortunate that the word myth I think it's used as a euphemism for like false narrative, deception, lie, but people don't want to say that because it's too strong, so they say myth, which really hurts the original meaning. Well, when it comes to truth and facts, so I have to do this quote. So Bob Dylan's muse was Susie Rotolo, and she wrote a wonderful book called A Freewheeling Time about 15 years ago. And in her introduction, she's writing about living in Greenwich Village at that time, and far wiser and more mature than Dylan, even though she was younger. And that's why she was his muse, because she showed him the ropes. But she says in her introduction, this may not be factual, but it's true. And we understand that the emotional, moral sense of things. I may not have my facts lined up exactly, but by God, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting, especially this day and age, social media and polarization, often, fact and truth, all gets meshed up. Did that in any way, shape, or form affect your book or your writing, or did you get, sort of affected by that?
Well, it's time to talk about the Brackett Massacre site.
Okay, there you go.
Well, as you know, for many years, that's what it said down there. Even the historic district sign said Brackett Massacre site. Well, we all know the standard line, the victors get the right to history. And Native peoples, Indians are people of an oral tradition, so obviously they didn't get the right what happened, although certainly a lot of them have more recently. But we put the new sign up, and we talked with indigenous peoples that connected to UNH, and we really thought about what's the new history sign, and we put up 11 of them all over town, the Heritage Commission. And we didn't put that word in there, and the reason we didn't, although some person on social media in Rye said, oh, he can't bring himself to say the word massacre. Damn right I can't, and I'll tell you why. Because we all know in war, horrific things are done by both sides. But too often in the telling by we European Americans of the history, whenever the Indians attacked us, it was a massacre. Whenever we attacked them, it was self-defense. And that's just a big lie. So that's why we didn't put the word massacre in, because those Brackets died and were taken away as prisoners of war in the context of a war that was going on. Multiple wars, endless wars, 1675, all the way up to 1890, right?
Yeah. Well, you're a history teacher, and obviously we talk a lot about the history of Rye. If you look around, unfortunately, and I, as president of the local historic society, I feel very strongly about utilizing community organization also to build community, to bring community together. But it ends up being that we typically attract older generation. Um, how can we, attract younger people also caring for this town and growing into the next generation? Because this town has so much history, and then you talk to younger people who say, "Oh, history is boring. It's like I don't need to know this." How do you feel about that?
Well, I told them at the junior high in 23, because I was almost a teacher there, because they invited me in for the Rye 400 to do Rye history topics. And I addressed each class with that. I said, don't you tell me history is boring. I said, you may have had a history class that was boring, but that doesn't make history boring, does it? And then we immediately proved, not just me, but them, because they dug into wonderful stuff. They were so inspired. They were laughing. They were serious. I mean, because it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And they saw it all. And I have to tell you this story that is so important. And I heard this on the PBS NewsHour, and it was from Santa Fe High School in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And there was a teacher and students, and they were doing some special project confronting all of our history. And at that time, the White House had been exhorting teachers to stop making us feel guilty and shameful about our history. And she looked right into the camera and said, well, the White House is wrong, and I'll tell you why. And this is why. And she let the students talk, and she talked, and she said, when you learn about the horrors of genocide and the Indians and slavery and exploited people and exploited ethnic groups and marginalized people, that doesn't have to lead to shame and guilt. That can lead to a fuller, honest reckoning with our history. And you ultimately feel better about your country, not worse, because you know all of it, and not just the whitewash part. And I thought she did a great job. So I'm just paraphrasing her.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked a lot about, the change of Rye and how it has changed. But when you drive through Rye, walk through Rye, live in Rye today, do you still see signs of the old Rye? Are there still a lot of things? What sort of stands out that brings back memories from days gone by?
Now, walking around the 7-acre field that we live in on Lang Road with my dog, it's just heavenly, because that's the field I grew up playing in, and it's still there. A lot more trees in it, but still a field. And then when I go and visit Roger down at the farm, and I put this in the preface to my book, but one day I stopped, and he was working on a fence by the garden. And we were chatting away, and then he told me about a geological formation that went right from inland, right under the farm, down towards the sea. I think I got that right, Roger. And I just loved that. And when I drove away, I looked at those fields, and I got a field story for you, because I don't want to forget this one. I was just telling Nancy about it. Don't let me forget this. So I was thinking to myself, because the Philbricks, did the conservation easement, those fields will remain forever free, those beautiful Philbrick fields. So earlier this year, Richard had just cut the hay. And I was driving by, but I only had one window in my car open. And I smelled that sweet hay. By the time I got home, it was still there because it was trapped in my car. And I thought, if ever there was something that evokes Rye's past and present, it is a sweet smell of freshly cut hay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You told me recently about the field that was fortunately preserved, right? We always talk about at the in the trolley tour where the New Hampshire militia used to practice.
That's right. That is such good news. Wow. So somebody called me and told me about it, because I've been in connection about it. So you all know Central Road between Grove and Cable. So you're going up, and you got the 1773 Jenna's house where the Davises live on the left, and then that beautiful field right across the road. You saw the for sale signs. You saw it's under contract, not to a developer, but to a Rye family. Is that good news or what? And yeah, and the thing about it is, I mean, when I first saw that sign went up, I wrote something in conservation. I said, "Well, can you buy it?" And that was under consideration. But what makes all these communities so beautiful, if they were all just forests, well, you couldn't see anything. I mean, we love the trees, but when you have the field with the forest, what a difference that makes, huh? Yeah.
Well, that's certainly good news. So looking a little bit towards the future, is there anything that worries you about Rye's future? Is there something that particularly excites you about Rye's future?
Well, I'm excited about next year. We're going to have 4 new members on the select board. And that has real potential to engage more people. They'll be able to spread their workload out. And I hope we can all, eventually come to a bigger meeting room too. If there's going to be 5 select board members, there should be a lot more people and not in that 1956 courtroom. Right. We got to get back upstairs, and we're working on renovating the town hall, so you'll be hearing more about that. But so that's a hopeful thing about the future, but we all know, and I've talked about it, it's just trying to keep a balance between the natural world and the human world. Great thing about Rye is 2/3 of the town is water. Start saving graves, right? Yeah. Not every town's so lucky with that.
Yes. So I'm going to ask a few very fast questions. You only have 1 or 2 words that you can answer, and then.
And I have before he does this.
And then we're going to turn the microphone over to the audience.
Yeah.
So
I just have to tell you this: it is a very humbling experience. The more you learn about Rye history, the more you realize you don't know. So you could probably stump me now.
Well, I don't think it's that. No, it's light, fun, and fast.
Yeah.
So, favorite Rye beach?
What's that?
Favorite Rye beach?
Oh, Janice.
Okay. What was the most surprising discovery in your research? 1 2-word answer.
Wow, most surprising. Rye in the 70s.
Okay. What was the best year in Rye's history? Sort of answer that, but year, not decade.
1976.
There you go. And that was because of Parsons, or?
Rye historical.
Yeah.
Parsons was emerging.
Right, and 250 year, right?
Yeah, the biggest party Rye ever had. Yeah.
If you could rename the book, what would you call it?
Rename it?
Yes.
Oh, but that's a. Wow, that's a good one. Yeah. We had some alternative titles. What did we come up with, Tom?
I don't remember. I think we stuck with a good one.
Yeah.
So while you were writing, did you have a favorite snack?
What's that?
While you were writing, did you have a favorite snack?
Oh my God, snack. Yes, I make the best nachos around. I absolutely do, and I'll give you the recipe. It's fabulous.
If you could pick a person from Rye's past, who would you want to give this book to?
Wow. Langdon Parsons.
Oh, wow. Okay. And for anybody who doesn't know, obviously he wrote the book, published in about 1903. Right?
Yeah, and we have to say this: Jenna Parsons, his great-granddaughter, and Edward Parsons, his great-grandson. Jen, of course, is on the board, couldn't be here tonight. She has to play in the orchestra in Portsmouth. But I was just in touch with Ed Parsons, who's been supplying Parsons history to us for years. And so he was very excited about this, and he said, I'm sure Langdon would love it.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much so far. Lou Karabasis. We welcome your questions. Lou Karabasis, he's on our board. Lou, if you turn the microphone, once it's green, it has a connection. So everybody can hear. Sometimes, if you just speak with your normal voice, we may not be able to hear. Lou has a microphone, so raise your hand, and Lou will give you the microphone, and Alex will be happy to answer your questions. Oh, come on, don't be shy. Yes, you have a question up here. Now you have time to think of more.
How do you see your book as complementing Parsons' work, and how do you see it as replacing, and how do you see it as just a very different approach?
So it definitely complements it because, of course, I had access to materials that Langdon didn't have, or it wasn't easy for him to get access to, like town reports and newspapers and so forth. He didn't write that kind of a book. And he was using a lot of like Huntington Porter's Century Sermon. That's how we got a lot of the 1700s. But he spent a lot of time in Concord, provincial papers. So a lot of primary sources in there. My book is very different. I got over 20 voices from other people in my book. So they complement each other. They are I obviously pulled several things from Langdon because I wanted to highlight them and get more people to keep looking at that book, because you need both of them.
Yes. There's a lady in the back, Lou.
Hi, thank you, Alex. My name is Rachel McCann. My question comes from Rye Beach Village District. Hi, Frank, I see you. Why on the Welcome to Rye Beach Village District sign, it's a ship, and we've also noticed that on our policeman's badges, it's a ship. Well, I don't really associate ship building or shipping with Rye. You know why that symbol is there?
Yeah, so the flag over here, so it went through several years ago. There was some kind of mistaken about the dates, but way back in time, a logo was created. And if you, Ralph Moranga's here tonight, he designed the bicentennial medal. There it is. If you look on the back, we being the coastal community, we're the seaport. Portsmouth is a river port, even though they like to call themselves the seaport. They're not on the ocean, we are. And if you can imagine 100 years ago, looking out to sea, what you would have seen is the most extraordinary sea of working sails, not pleasure craft, working sails of every imaginable kind, from gondolas to seven-masted schooners. And so it was just so natural, where the land meets the sea in this extraordinary coastline that we have, unparalleled.
Yes.
Come on. Yeah.
There's a lady over there.
Mike's way over there. I was gonna ask, do you spend some time on the Isles of Shoals and look?
Yes, although I
If-
recognize how well.
Did everybody understand that?
Isles of Shoals,
Yeah.
I have some of that in there, most definitely. You know, the Laytons going out there in White Island, and certainly the hotel industry, and people in 1914 watching the incredible inferno as the Appledore House burned to the ground, taking Celia Thax's cottage with it. And yet, today, Frank can sit at the Drake House and look out at his counterpart, the Oceanic. 1873 Drake House, 1876 Oceanic. And then right next to Frank is the Tui's house, the former 14-room Rye Beach Inn Hotel. So we still have 3 buildings in this town, for Stars and Rye, that were hotels. Frank. Oh.
And then,
I was wondering, did you ever have a drink with one of your family members at the Great Farragut Hotel?
Say that again, Greg.
Did you ever have a drink at the Great Farragut Hotel with a family member?
A Drakeside Hotel?
Farragut.
the
Oh,
Farragut.
the ferry. Oh, yes, I did. In fact, I grew up going there because my father would take me to the cocktail lounge. But I turned 21 in 1966, so then when I came back, I was able to actually go there. So the lounge was just across the road at the end of the hotel, just across from the Farragut Playhouse, just across Central Road. So that's where it was located. And by the way, that hotel could have been saved just like the Wentworth, but it was the 70s, not the 90s. I don't have to say anymore. Right?
And I like the story that you always tell on the trolley is the 9th and the 10th holes used to be there.
Oh, geez. Mr. Carter, who owned the hotel, there was a normal snack bar on the ocean side, but on the other side, where the 9th green was, he was serving ardent spirits to those who finished the first 9. And they always said they did a lot better on the first 9 than they did on the back 9, but they had a good time.
Yeah, any other questions? Little ways up the street, there used to be Stoney College. I don't know if anybody ever saw that famous building. I don't know if you want to add to that. That's an amazing story because Rye used to be a college town.
It is so good that he asked this. I do have to tell you, when you look in the documents of Rye and annual reports and other things, a theme that runs through it is alcohol, as you wouldn't be surprised, and alcohol abuse. And that's really where Rye police force comes into being, because people couldn't enforce it. It was horrible. And so we went dry in 1899. But the reason I'm mentioning the context of the Stoney Manor is because, as you know, that means it starts as a hotel, then it's the women's college in the 30s, but then the church buys it and it becomes the Franciscan Friary Retreat House. And those wonderful friars did such great work. People struggling with alcohol, marital problems, everything. Their wisdom went so far, and it was so greatly missed when that was torn down in 1995. We could have kept that and made something different out of it.
Yeah. By the way, we haven't. Yes.
Just one quick one for Alex. We used to have, I think, this outer marker from the approach to the air base, and I don't think it's there anymore, but I'm just wondering how the base closure affected Rye, if it did at all.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. 1990, the end of Pease Air Force Base, and the impact that it had on the seacoast, and the schools, and everywhere. The Beacon Outer Marker building is still there on Lock Road. In fact, we did a Civic News video there, and we stood right by the building and where the marker would have been. This was for the Air Force to use as a marker coming in to line up, go right over Rye Center, over our house. It's a wonder I can still hear. But that was extraordinary because I'm sure you all know that we had airports starting to be built in the 1920s. So there was a Portsmouth Municipal Airport that existed. And we have some pictures at the museum that show some B-29s on the runway long before Pease, back during the war. And then they began to build Pease in the mid-50s, and it opened 56. I remember driving over there and watching that. Huge job, and a great transition to peacetime use, certainly.
We have another anniversary coming up next year. St. Andrews is turning 150.
Yes, absolutely. And if ever there was an English chapel reproduced in America, that's it, isn't it? An English country chapel. I mean, Thomas Gray could go there and recite his elegy, right? Which I have in my book. I couldn't resist putting it in there. So.
Yeah, everybody been to St. Andrews? It's
Yes.
beautiful, beautiful church. So we always stop there with the trolley, go inside, ring the bell.
And it's so welcoming to all denominations. It's wonderful.
Yes. What other questions? Anything else that comes to mind that you want to share tonight? I mean, this is your moment. For a long time, Rye always sort of looked at that. The history of Rye was Parsons, but it finished in 1903, and you set out to say, I want to continue this to the modern days, so you accomplished that.
So I send you off with this thought. There is so much that you can do to carry on with what I have done. And I'm just carrying on, from Bill Varrell and Langdon Parsons and everybody else who's already contributed with other books. And one person I haven't mentioned, just briefly, Tom Clary. His book, Oceanside History of Rye Beach and the Farragut, is brilliant because it's nothing but newspaper articles turned into a book. And that in itself is brilliant. We have newspaper articles about Rye in that museum that cover almost 100 years. I'd love to get somebody going on a project, the Portsmouth Herald History of Rye. It's a gold mine, including the pictures.
That's great. There's one more question. Well, Eileen.
I'm wondering if you can explain why we never got a high school in Portsmouth and the history of that.
Yeah, so we tried once in 1890 to have a high school in the town hall. And I don't know the details. It wasn't clear in the town report because they didn't really write much narrative then in the 1890s. But they tried, and there's a nice picture of it. So as you know, when you finish 8th grade, unless you had the money to go to a secondary prep school, that's it. So, but what's really cool to think about is this. Portsmouth High School opened. And this is where imagination comes in. I don't know, whatever you think about this. But Portsmouth High School opened, that building on Daniel Street and the Church Street, right? That is 1849. Well, don't you think people in Rye got wind of that and said, there's a chance we're going to have to pay something. Well, we're not going to be able to go back and forth every day. But interestingly enough, the year after that school opened, the Sagamore Bridge, the first one was built. So that gets you Portsmouth a lot quicker than it used to, right? And so maybe some of the kids went in and they stayed overnight with friends in Portsmouth, because of course we've always been like this, Portsmouth and Rye. So everybody was going back and forth with friends. So maybe they boarded with friends and they came home on the weekend. And so that's a possibility where kids got secondary education, didn't have to pay for a prep school. I'm just imagining that. Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else? So this is the book. Okay. It exists as a hardcover and as a softcover. Some of you already ordered it and paid for it. We do have tables in the back where you can pick it up. Your name's on the list. But if you didn't order it, we do have extras. Alex kindly donated this, the rights to it, to the Historic Society. So whatever few dollars we're making off it go all to the Rye Historic Society. Of course, thank you. Thank you very much. And we often get confused with Heritage Commission, Rye Historic District. No, we're not a town entity. We're a 501(c)(3) not-for-profit. So, and Alex's family, his mother helped found it. Alex was a founding member, done amazing work over the last 50 years, and I think we have a lot more in the next 50 or 100 years to preserve this town's history. So this is a great gift to the town, all of you, but also to the society. So we got tables in the back. Feel free to, go there and pick it up. And please be patient, because everybody comes at the same time, so you may form a line. So talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends. This is a Rye evening. Thank you so much tonight for coming out.
Thank you.
And Alex will sign the books in the back. So Alex will move to the back. You can also meet Alex at the museum, either on appointment